Hi everyone, my name is Nathan from jazzguitarlessons.net, and welcome back to Album Deep Dives. This is episode 3. On today's episode, I'll be covering the acclaimed guitarist Joe Pass, and specifically two of the albums that he's produced, which is For Django, a 1964 album, and Virtuoso, a 1973 album. Now, a bit of a personal note here. Virtuoso is the very first jazz guitar album that I ever laid my hands on, and I played it countless hours, I believe, on rides to and from my home and Carleton University, where I was taking my Bachelor of Music degree. So it's pretty close to my heart, you might say. By now, Joe Pass is a revered name in the jazz guitar world. His legendary chordal facility as well as technical virtuosity have put him on the level of musicians like Art Tatum or Charlie Parker, each one an avatar of their respective instrument. To understand Pass's broad style, it's helpful to listen to his playing in different contexts. In this podcast, as I mentioned before, we'll be highlighting key tracks from For Django, his seminal 1964 quartet record, as well as the aptly titled 1973 solo album, Virtuoso. Even today, these albums are landmarks of bebop guitar and solo guitar respectively, and they help to paint a picture of Pass's development over nearly a decade. The story of For Django begins when Pass was just 11 years old, when he heard the music of Django Reinhardt for the very first time. In later interviews, Pass described Reinhardt as his first major influence, followed shortly by Charlie Christian. He described them both, along with Wes Montgomery, as players who added another dimension to the instrument. 3 years later, Pass joined a group called The Gentlemen of Rhythm that played tunes in the style of Reinhardt and Stéphane Grappelli. With Pass playing lead, the group performed at local dances, and Pass used the money to support his working-class parents. 20 years later, after a decade of arrests, drug problems, and eventual rehab, Pass's star was on the rise once again with a series of records on the Pacific Jazz label. With his fourth Pacific record, Pass opted for a selection of tunes written or frequently played by Reinhardt, as well as tribute tunes. For Django features the rhythm section of Joe Pisano on rhythm guitar, Jim Hugert on bass, and Colin Bailey on drums. It was recorded at Pacific Jazz Studios in Hollywood and produced by Richard Bach, whose name you may recognize from the Wes Montgomery tune Bach to Bach. The album begins with a dirge-like intro on the John Lewis tune Django. It sounds like Pass is playing with his thumb, something he occasionally did to achieve a more mellow sound. When the time kicks in and his solo starts, Pass switches to the pick and plays an immaculately crafted stream of bebop lines. At the start of this solo, the rhythms are fairly consistent and the lines resolve in such a logical way that it gives the feeling of some kind of modern Johann Sebastian Bach piece. It's as if the solo has been sitting in some kind of sonic marble, and Pass is just revealing it to the listener. As a jazz guitar teacher myself, this is one of the solos that I have to teach to all of my students, at least the first chorus. Upon hearing Django for the first time, guitarist Steve Mazikowski remembers thinking, and I quote, "Yeah, this sounds good, but kind of dated. And then when Joe started going double time, it was like, wow, what is he doing here? This is unbelievable. These lines were coming out with such fluidity and just perfection, man. I sat in my basement for the next 2 weeks trying to pick out what he was doing." The third track, Nuage, now feels like a precursor to the solo playing we'd hear later on Virtuoso. It begins with a rubato solo guitar intro consisting of trademark pass licks punctuating the melody, and into a concise melodic solo. The underrated star of the show here is Joe Pisano's comping, which allows Pass to take a much-needed breath in between phrases. Pass had a great admiration for the egoless, supportive approach of Pisano, and the two worked together on many subsequent records. He also looked up to him greatly on a personal level, as Pisano was one of the rare examples of a sober jazz musician. After the last gig they played together, Pass left Pisano a note saying how much he had enjoyed playing together, and that he was the foremost guitar player that he wanted to work with. Following Nuage is the title track of the record, written by Pass himself. It's a simple, elegant waltz that shows off his economy as a composer. In the solo, Pass creates a kind of rhythmic tension by playing straight eighth notes over the driving swing of the rhythm section. This helps create a clear contrast in mood between the solo and the more mellow, relaxed melody. The next tune, Night and Day, is the clear highlight of the whole record. Right off the top, Pass begins with a blazing solo chorus that sounds confident and relaxed, in spite of the fast tempo. Although Pass was known for his encyclopedic knowledge of chords, tracks like this show he was capable of playing single-note bebop guitar as well as anyone. The tone and general approach on Night and Day resembles that of Pat Martino, another Italian-American jazz guitarist whose career was also beginning to take off. Placed right in the middle of the track list, it feels like the centerpiece of the record, complete with a playfully interactive drum-guitar trading section. Rounding out the record is Limehouse Blues, a Reinhardt staple. Pass's solo here was referenced by Pat Metheny, who wrote, "That is one of my favorite guitar solos that anyone has ever gotten onto tape. I can still sing it in my head as I type this, and I haven't gotten that record out in a long time. It is that memorable to me." Nearly 10 years after For Django and 6 albums later, we find Pass delving into his past yet again on 1973's Virtuoso. Solo guitar playing had always been present in Pass's life, first as a child playing for his father's friends, and later during a stay at a drug rehabilitation center. But he had never placed it at the forefront of a record until this very album. When asked about the genesis of his solo playing, Pass responded, "I did it kinda by accident. Nobody got mad or threw anything, so I continued to do it." Virtuoso begins with another take on Cole Porter's Night and Day, this one markedly different than the For Django version. Immediately, the tone is noticeably different than a typical jazz guitar record. It sounds as though Pass is playing an unamplified archtop with a bit of the room sound mixed in. In the first minute alone, Pass shows off mastery of the entire range of the guitar, playing sweeping melodic runs, inner voice leading, and contrapuntal bass lines. The album continues with Stella by Starlight, where Pass punctuates the melody with a flurry of single-note runs. The result is reminiscent of Art Tatum's stride piano playing. Although we may have gotten used to this kind of playing due to the high level of modern players like Pascal Grasso, it must be said that at the time, this kind of playing was quite groundbreaking. Later, we hear Pass tackle How High the Moon, which is notable for its myriad of different textures. In the space of about 5 minutes, Pass drifts from an interactive walking bass with chord shots into a bluesy single-note section and off on occasional tangents of strummed chord solos. The highlights of this track are when Pass settles on a rhythmic motif, which breaks up the seemingly unending stream of eighth notes. Following How High the Moon is Pass's take on Cherokee, which is worth listening to for its blisteringly fast tempo alone. It's an almost comical speed to be playing at as a solo guitarist, and you can tell Pass is perhaps jokingly justifying the bold title of the record. Near the end of the track list is Pass's own Blues for Alacon, a tribute to Sam Alacon. He sounds really comfortable here in comparison to the anxious version of Cherokee from earlier. The acoustic archtop tone works really well in this context. This dry tone, along with Pass's relaxed swing feel, combine for an earthy quality that makes this tune one of the highlights of the record. Luckily for intrigued listeners, both of the records covered here today were followed up with sequels and related material. The band from For Django reconvened on Summer Nights, Appassionato, and Six String Santa, and there's a documentary about the record as well. Fans of Virtuoso will want to check out Virtuoso 2, 3, and 4, as well as the many live performances on DVD. After listening to these records, it's plainly clear why Joe Pass is referred to as possibly the most complete guitarist of his era. His ability to adapt bebop language to the guitar, play stunning unaccompanied stride guitar, and not to mention compose beautiful original tunes, continues to be a model for jazz guitarists around the world. He was one of my first inspirations, and I hope he's one of yours as well. Thanks for listening to this episode of Album Deep Dives. Once again, my name is Nathan from jazzguitarlessons.net, and as always, happy shedding.